I was 26, working alone in the Appalachian wetlands, doing field surveys. I'm a biologist, so remote forests, swamps, and silence were just part of the job. That day I pulled my state-marked vehicle off a narrow road built by the U.S. Forest Service. It was public land, not private, so I wasn't trespassing. The forest was old-growth pine, dense and quiet. The edges were packed with underbrush, almost like a natural wall. I walked about 200 meters in, just another day with mud, insects, and data sheets. Then nature called. I stepped off the trail to take care of it. You get used to it in this line of work. That's when I heard it yelling, from back where I'd parked. I paused mid-squat, thinking maybe someone needed help, or maybe I'd parked too close to someone's property. Annoying, but not unusual. But then gunshots, not warning shots, real ones, sharp, loud. My stomach dropped. I froze. I wasn't ready to walk back into that. I stood still, trying to figure out my move, and I heard someone thrashing through the brush. They were heading into the woods, toward me. I told myself again, this is public land. I'm not doing anything wrong. Still, something in me said this wasn't just a pissed-off landowner. The air felt off. My skin crawled. I've worked in remote areas before, but this time something felt different. This wasn't normal. That part of the county was known for being tight-knit and unfriendly to outsiders. People vanished in these forests sometimes. It's not talked about much, but anyone local knows. The game warden presence here is double what you'd see elsewhere. There's a reason. I started moving, crouched low, staying off the trail, heading toward the main road roughly 600 meters away. More gunshots rang out. This time closer. Different sound, cracking sharp. Was he shooting at me, or just trying to scare me? I didn't wait to find out. Before we move on, here is a quick question. If you were in my shoes, would you have stayed hidden or risked running? Tell me in the comments. Boldest answer gets pinned. I kept moving through the underbrush, heart pounding. My boots barely touched the ground. I didn't care about staying dry anymore. Just fast and quiet. I didn't know if he was behind me or just firing into the air. But I wasn't going to stop and check. The road was still a few hundred meters off. But I had decent bearings. I'd scouted this area before. I aimed for a low point, I remembered. A drainage ditch near an old culvert under the highway. It wasn't cover, but it was something. As I moved, I kept hearing branches breaking, heavy steps in the distance. I couldn't tell if it was the same guy or just the woods playing tricks, but it didn't matter. I ran harder. My legs were burning, lungs raw. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. I finally reached the road and dropped under the bridge, out of sight. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called a colleague. I gave him my location just in case I didn't make it. Told him exactly where to look for my body. That's the kind of thought you don't forget having. Then I called 911. First time in my life I ever had to. I expected urgency. Instead, I got a half-interested operator who acted like I was overreacting. She transferred me to a local deputy. Same deal. He basically shrugged me off. Probably just some guy shooting cans. Like I didn't know the difference between target practice and being hunted. So I moved further deeper into a public hunting area, figuring it was safer than waiting roadside. That's when a game warden finally rolled up. He took me seriously. I explained everything. Location, vehicle, shots fired, direction the guy came from. He didn't doubt me for a second. He even said some locals had problems with a particular landowner nearby, not from around here. Had a reputation for being aggressive. Louisiana plates. Outsider. After about an hour of waiting, the deputy finally came out to meet me. He still didn't seem bothered by any of it, just doing the minimum. But he agreed to give me a lift back to my truck. I wasn't thrilled about going back, but I knew I had to get my vehicle and leave. We pulled up to where I had parked earlier. That's when I saw him. The man was there. He was parked on an ATV, rifle across his lap, just sitting in the dark like he'd been waiting for me the whole time. I didn't say anything, I didn't look at him. I just got out, walked straight to my truck, got in and drove off. The deputy didn't say much either. I don't know what kind of conversation they had after I left, if any. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. It was nearly 9 p.m. I still had a 4-hour drive home, and I was completely wrung out. All I wanted was to get back to somewhere with walls and locks. Later that night I kept thinking, maybe I should have said something to him. Maybe I should have handed him a printout of the county map and pointed to the exact spot where public land ends and his private property begins. But I didn't. I let it go. After that day I started carrying a firearm in the field. Quietly. No one told me to. I just didn't want to take another chance. Trusting my gut saved me. Not the badge, not the phone calls, not the deputy. Just instinct. That was enough to keep me from walking back into a rifle barrel. Sometimes it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. All that matters is that you walk away alive. I was about 15 when this happened, but I still remember it clearly. It was late, around 2 a.m., when loud knocking jolted me out of sleep. I jumped up and rushed into the hallway. My parents and my brother were already out of their rooms, looking confused and half asleep. The knocking had turned into pounding hard, fast, desperate. My dad held up his hand and told us to stay back. He went toward the front door while we stood frozen. Then we heard it, a voice outside, muffled but clear. "Help, help me." My mom and I clutched each other. My dad looked out the peephole but saw nothing. He checked the front window. Still nothing. The porch light was on and the space was empty. He turned back toward us, but the pounding started again. Louder, faster, more shouting. "Help me, help me." He grabbed the phone and called 911. While he was on the line, my brother stepped toward the window near the front door, trying to see something. His face turned white. He waved at us urgently to come to the family room. Something was wrong. We followed him and looked at where he was pointing. And that's when everything changed. The sound wasn't coming from the front porch. It was coming from underneath us, directly below the family room floor. The pounding, the shouting, it was coming from under the house. We all stood there in silence, hearing "Help me, oh God, help me," from the crawl space under our feet. My mom pulled me close. My dad finished his call with the dispatcher, but he didn't know what to say anymore. None of us did. Before we move on, here is a quick question. What would you have done if the screaming was coming from right beneath your feet? Tell me in the comments. The best comment gets pinned. The police arrived not long after. 2 officers came to the door. My dad opened it, and they stepped inside quickly. The pounding and shouting had stopped by then, but the house was still tense. My heart was racing. None of us had moved from the family room. The officers stepped outside and walked around the house. They found the crawl space entrance. It was a low panel tucked just beneath the living room window. One of them crouched down and aimed his flashlight underneath while the other kept watch. A few minutes passed. Then one of the officers called out that he'd found someone. They pulled a man out from under the house. He was in his 20s, sweating, filthy, wide-eyed. He looked half-conscious and out of his mind. One of the officers cuffed him and they guided him to the patrol car without much resistance. He didn't say much, just kept repeating something under his breath that none of us could understand. After they drove him away, one of the officers came back inside and gave us the story. The guy had gotten high on crack, wandered into the neighborhood, and somehow slipped under the house through the crawl space. He had no real plan. He wasn't trying to break in, at least not at first. He said he thought he was lost and trapped, so he started yelling for help. That was his explanation. No one knew how long he'd been under there before he started banging. It could have been minutes, could have been hours. The officer said he'd seen worse, but yeah, this one was weird. My dad just nodded, still shaken. My mom didn't say anything for the rest of the night. She kept checking the front door lock over and over. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, things felt off in the house. Everyone was quiet. Even my brother, who usually brushed things off, kept glancing at the floor like he expected the noise to start again. My dad checked the crawl space himself after the police left. There was nothing down there, just dirt, some old insulation, and a few scattered bits of junk. But the thought of someone being that close right under our feet while we slept, that stayed with us. That week, my dad sealed off the crawl space entrance, put up new locks, heavy boards, even motion lights along the sides of the house. None of us said much about it, but we all knew we'd never forget what happened. I couldn't stop thinking about the way that guy sounded. Panic, fear, confusion, like he didn't even know where he was. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened. What if he had found a way up into the house? What if we hadn't heard him at all? What if he hadn't been yelling for help? We never saw him again. The police said he was taken to a hospital for observation, and that was it. No follow-up, no explanation, just a strange man under our house in the middle of the night, screaming to be let out. That story stuck with us. Every so often my mom would bring it up, usually in the middle of another conversation. "Remember that night?" she'd say quietly, and the room would go still again. I still think about it sometimes, especially when the house creaks, or when I wake up in the middle of the night and hear something shift beneath the floorboards. Even now, years later, I still catch myself glancing down when things go quiet. I was 7 when this happened, but I still remember the feeling. My mom had taken me to Great America, a theme park in Sunnyvale. We didn't go often, maybe once or twice a year when she could afford it. I always looked forward to it. Rides, food, fun. It was supposed to be a good day, but something was off that day. It started small. I felt like someone was watching me. Not just looking, watching. You know that weird feeling you get when you know someone's eyes are on you even when you can't see them. That's how it felt. I told my mom. She brushed it off, said I was imagining things. So I tried to shake it. We kept going through the park, rides, snacks, walking around, but the feeling never left. In fact, it got worse. It followed me everywhere, through every part of the park. I'd look around trying to spot someone staring, but I never saw anyone. Still, I knew something wasn't right. At one point, I was begging my mom to take me home. She thought I was just tired or cranky, but eventually she gave in and we left early. I couldn't really explain what was bothering me. I just wanted to leave. Years later, I found out I wasn't wrong to feel scared. We moved to Eureka when my parents got back together. My dad's father, my so-called grandfather, lived there too. I didn't know him. No one really did. He was a recluse. Died not long after we moved. My dad, being next of kin, had to go through his stuff. That house was something else. Rifles in every room. Guns in the car, in the bathroom. Under pillows. Surveillance cameras mounted everywhere outside. Piles of VHS tapes. Footage from the cameras. Some worn out from being watched so much. Then we found the photos. Before we move on, here is a quick question. What would you do if you found out someone had been secretly watching and photographing you as a child? Drop it in the comments. Best response gets pinned. My mom was the one who found the first photo. I heard her gasp from the bedroom. Then she shouted something that made my blood run cold. She rarely swore in front of me, so I knew it had to be bad. I ran into the room and saw her holding a picture in her hand. She looked pale, like she might pass out. She handed it to me. It was a photo of me and her. At that theme park, I was holding a corn dog, drink in the other hand. But what hit me hardest was my face. That exact suspicious look I remembered. That exact moment. Someone had taken that picture from close range. Close enough that we never saw them. And it wasn't just one. There were stacks of them. Dozens. Different angles. Different places. Some at the park. Some from other days. Other outings. Some taken from behind fences. Some from right up close. Too close. Like someone had walked right up behind us and snapped the shot. I felt sick. We kept digging through his stuff. Found more photos. Some were clearly taken from inside a car. Others from a distance, but a few were taken from within arm's reach. I don't know how that's even possible. I don't remember anyone ever being that close. I don't know how he got that near without us noticing. My mom didn't say much after that. She put the photos away, walked out of the room and sat down like she'd just been hit by a truck. I didn't know what to say either. All I could do was sit there and feel the fear creep in. Why did he take those photos? Why us? What was he thinking? We never got answers. Just those images burned into our minds. The worst part is, I never even knew he was there, but he was, all along. After that day, I couldn't stop thinking about those photos. They haunted me. I'd lie in bed wondering how many other times he had been watching us. How many times he stood nearby, camera in hand, and we had no idea. My mom never spoke about it again. She boxed everything up, photos, tapes, documents, and stored them away. She didn't burn them, didn't throw them out, just packed them up, like she didn't want to see them, but also couldn't let them go. I tried to move on, but it stayed with me, that heavy feeling in my chest. That memory of seeing my own face in a photo I never knew was taken. It's not easy to forget something like that. Years later, I started thinking about what it meant. Maybe he wasn't just watching. Maybe he thought he had some kind of connection to us. Or maybe he was just sick in the head. I'll never know. What I do know is that I was right to feel something that day in the theme park. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being paranoid. That feeling, that gut instinct, it was real, and it scares me now to think how close he must have been. It's not easy to forget something like that. Years later, I started thinking about what it meant. Maybe he wasn't just watching. Maybe he thought he had some kind of connection to us. Or maybe he was just sick in the head. I'll never know. What I do know is that I was right to feel something that day in the theme park. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being paranoid. That feeling, that gut instinct. It was real, and it scares me now to think how close he must have been. How long it had been going on. Sometimes I wonder if there were more photos, more tapes, things we didn't find. I don't know what he was planning, if anything. Maybe it was just some twisted obsession, or maybe it could have been worse. I try not to think about that part too much. Even now, years later, I still get uneasy in crowds, still check over my shoulder in public, still feel that same prickling on the back of my neck when I think someone's watching me. Because once you've lived through something like that, you don't really forget it. You just carry it quietly.